Welcome to my GRC POV. Before we begin, please note that all views, opinions, and commentary expressed by my guest and me are strictly our own personal perspectives. They do not represent or reflect the official positions of any employers, organizations, or affiliations we may have. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute professional advice. Always consult with qualified professionals for your specific GRC needs. Now let's dive in. All right, everybody, welcome to my GRC POV, and I am your host, Monica Reagor. And on this podcast, we have real conversations with industry experts, practitioners, leaders, and advisors. And they're not here to talk about theory, and they're definitely not here to talk about the check the box compliance. They're here to give us real world information and experience and hopefully be able to apply it right now in our own environment. So without further ado, my guest today is known for his work in the intersection of operational risk, culture, and emerging technology. He leads an enterprise risk program inside a large media organization while serving on many boards across AI, blockchain, cybersecurity, financial services. And so, listen, this conversation is critical because innovation keeps accelerating, but governance risk and compliance is often behind. So let's welcome to MPG community, Devon Euring. Welcome, Devon. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me, Monica. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a minute. I was introduced to you probably in 2021, I think, in another organization, and we've been supporting each other afar.
Time has been moving.
Yeah,
for
right.
sure.
Almost 5 years, and that's a long time.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So let's just jump right in. Tell my community, tell LinkedIn, Substack more about Devon and your current role, and then how did you get to govern risk and compliance?
Yeah, sure. So I want to say now roughly 15 plus years of experience in the GRC space. And today, as you mentioned, I lead as the head of operational risk management at iHeartMedia. In addition to that, I do serve 3 board advisory seats that span across 3 different organizations, one being Blockchain Lex Group.
Wow.
The other one is Coalition Against Financial Crimes.
Wow.
And the last one is Sybase Risk Management. These kind of span across all fintech spaces from blockchain to AI to crypto to financial crimes, as I mentioned. But also recently, a couple weeks ago, I actually was just newly appointed as the founding VP for the Association of Women in Cryptocurrency for here in the Texas area. So I got my hands in a little bit of everything as it relates to all things digital, because obviously that's where we are right now. That's where we're headed. And if I can be an advocate from a risk side to support any of these entities, I'm all for it, right? So I would say in reference to my path into GRC, it really didn't start with, let's say, policy. It started with consequences, in my opinion. I mean, I came up through operations where decisions didn't fail in theory. They failed in production, honestly.
Wow.
And early on, I saw, teams do everything right on paper and still create exposure because no one owned the decisions when trade-off got uncomfortable. I'm sure you've been in those uncomfortable meetings where nobody wants to take accountability and everybody's staring at the screen, not wanting to speak up. But that's when I realized, risk isn't documentation problem, it's a leadership problem, right? GRC became the discipline I used to translate uncertainty into ownership. And that's what risk rewritten is. It's my philosophy and theory where risk isn't something you just avoid, it's something you lead. So I would say that's, basically how I got my involvement in the space of GRC, really.
Yeah, so you really just opened it up with a ton for us to unpack. And I think the very first thing that you pointed out is it's that moment where it looks good on paper in theory, but the execution isn't comprehensive or it's missing components, or it's just as simple as ownership. Who is owning
Absolutely.
this portion of the risk
Absolutely.
or operations, right? And with GRC, there are so many components and pipelines into the GRC framework. So you have the governance side. It could be 5 teams doing 5 different things. And then you have the risk guide that has 7 different teams, first, second, and third line of defense. And that's just the defense side of it. That's not the policy side of it,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And then you have your compliance, which is changing every single day with like over 200, 250 new regulations every single day that's being adopted. And for many corporations domestically, but we have to know it internationally. You have to know it for your industry. You have to know what your associated industries, because even though it's fintech, it could be fintech for hospitals. It could be fintech for government.
Absolutely.
So you have to understand those regulations and cross functions. So my question to you is, in your early experience, you share that what shaped you was essentially the consequences, but it wasn't the failure of the people knowing the policy, it was the leadership execution. Can you explain, in your opinion, that leadership and ownership is a great risk into the GRC path, or what's your perspective on that?
Yeah. So when it comes to leadership and ownership, they go hand in hand, but they simply do not a lot of the times. And the reason why is because no one wants to be accountable for a risk, right? No one wants to be the person that owns it. And when that happens, that's when failure can continue to exist. So I feel like it's really important that leadership to really have a clear understanding of not just metrics that they're looking at, but also the story, because that's where the real, I think, root cause lies. It's, metrics, you can look at data all day, but until you start understanding how the dots are connected, that's when the story can really help you really truly mitigate any potential risk, but also really find out who should be held accountable. Who is
Yeah.
the, correct leader that should be supporting this risk. So I think that's why it's important.
So that brings up another great point, because um, that's like what I tell my teams, like operational risk shifts from concept to responsibility, right? And
Absolutely.
so if it's one thing to know something, but it's who's going to take responsibility for, whatever it is that the policy states, the procedure states, or in my opinion, just good, reasonable, common sense. Like, I don't know. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'm always having conversations around, okay, if there's an incident, what happened? And the first
Yeah.
question is, is there a policy and procedure? And they're like, yeah, but we assumed,
Yeah.
right? We jumped the policy and procedure. And now there's an incident. And I'm thinking, but that's why we have those.
Right? Exactly. A
Right.
hundred percent. I agree. Yes.
So which brings me to my next point is understanding concepts of responsibility, understanding, ownership and leadership are two different things. Like, leading is one thing, that's just the overall oversight or view, but then it's the actual responsibility of owning it. It's the responsibility of, I take full control and authority over this particular portion of the risk management. In your opinion, what risk or compliance issue that really demands the most attention right now in your space, especially being in media?
I would speak, future term, but also like you said, in reality right now. I would say honestly, it's unknown decision making, especially
Mm,
in AI.
yeah.
That's why I'm a big advocate on the ethical side of AI and just making sure that it is governed. Because what I've seen that most organizations are focused on models,
Hmm.
tools, and regulation, which, don't get me wrong, are extremely important, but the real exposure sits in accountability gaps, right? I've watched teams approve, for instance, possible AI driven workflows because of, let's say, someone signed off on it, they got their approval, and only to realize later on that
Mm,
no one owned the outcome for the customer perspective when something went wrong. And, if ownership isn't explicit before automation, blame becomes inevitable after impact. And
yeah.
that's honestly the greatest risk isn't innovation. It's really it's diffusion of responsibility.
Mm,
It comes down to, those tough conversations. Well, who is responsible? Who takes accountability, as we mentioned,
mm,
because all that has that residual risk effect. Because if you're in an environment like I work in, let's say, where we have a lot of customers that receive that residual risk impact, that affects our reputational risk essentially, right? And that's something that we want to, be cognizant of. But the way that you keep it at the forefront is really having those tough conversations and not necessarily playing a blame game, but really understanding where this needs to live and who should be supporting it on a continual basis.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe you could tell me if you agree with this or not, but I feel like even even for my company and my organization, um, one of the things I find to be the common struggle, even in my day job or my nonprofit, is the execution versus intent. I intended to
Mm,
do, but to
yes,
your point, the execution of how do we get there? And then for us, we can take big models and break it down to pieces, but not everybody in the organization does that. I have engineers. You may have also engineers or program managers in your space, and they don't necessarily grasp that the concept of this is the intent, but I still need you to execute. Like my
exactly.
execution doesn't come from the compliance team. The execution really comes from you all being in a space and trusting the policy and the procedures that are in place. Is that something that you're seeing across the board and also in your the other organizations that you support?
Yeah, and in fact, that's a great point because unfortunately, when we talk about execution versus intent,
Yeah.
what that does equate to is that it really exposes those who truly have the knowledge base and the experience to really execute the job versus what I like to call seat warmers who they have all the intentions in the world, but the execution is falling very short. And when execution falls short, that's when the quality falls short.
Yeah.
And as we work in the space that we work in, as it relates to enterprise security, quality is necessary because you got to really know where you need to go, what vulnerabilities are exposed, and how to correctly mitigate those, right? Because time is of the essence,
Yes.
unfortunately. So that execution is so important because that really what separates, I would say, someone who's credible versus someone who's not. You know.
Yeah, that's good. I think that is important. It's easy to know the theory of compliance or risk management. You can probably mimic or parrot anything you hear on this podcast, but how do you actually
Yeah.
execute?
And if I can add to something that really drives us home is it's just really they confuse alignment with agreement, right? Too. It's like most organizations agree on what good looks like,
Mm-hmm.
and then execution breaks down when accountability meets inconvenience.
Ah,
And that's where, I use a simple model where it's simply design, decision, drift, where basically design where the risk should be considered, and then decision where risk is accepted or escalated, and then when we talk about drift, where good intentions quietly erode, right? It's because
right.
most failures don't happen at design, they happen in drift. And
Yeah.
when habits overrides principles, that's when policy doesn't fail, the discipline does, right? And, and
Yeah.
and you have to be disciplined in the environment that we work in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So these are the conversations that I think is so important for us to get out into the field. That's why we have my GRC POV. We all have, a different perspective, but the truth of the matter, it does come down to execution. It comes down to
100%.
ensuring that there is a framework in place, right? But then it comes down to your decision. Can we please don't make assumptions? Assumptions is,
Yes.
is more
Assumptions are
dangerous.
dangerous.
Yeah. Like, I don't know how many times I've had to say to someone this week alone, why did you assume? That's why we have the
Yes.
policies in place. Why did you
Yes.
assume?
And if you're assuming working in GRC, you should not be working in
In
GRC.
GRC ever. We make no
Yeah.
assumptions. I had to tell
Yeah.
someone literally in a conversation that yes, we drive, my team drives InfoSec and compliance, but we set the standards, right? We define it, but we don't execute. It is
Hmm.
the rest of our engineering department that executes.
Hmm.
Now you guys, and then push the information back to us. Not about to go diving for it. And how good are we as an organization? Because infosec or compliance or your risk teams really are not to micromanage you. There has to be ownership right into your other departments, right? All the way down to HR, to accounting, to purchasing. Separate associated departments have to execute. We are here to just provide guidance, give you a little
Absolutely.
bumper, check the box as far as doing the audits to ensure that you're following those processes, but we don't want to micromanage how you do it.
Well, yeah, and I agree. And if you think about it too, in the totality, that's why a lot of roles are very much independent contributors in this space.
That's good.
Because they expect that out of you. You take that in consideration, knowing that, hey, I need to rely, one, on my experience, two, on my work ethic to ensure that, like we said, we're going to execute the job correctly, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. So here's my next question to you. How do you balance business objectives with the regulatory pressures, right? Because that is the painstaking heartbeat of GRC. We have the business objective, we have to make money, we have to be able to deliver for our customers, our internal stakeholders, our board, but yet we still have to meet this really rapid evolving space of compliance depending on the field that you're in and the industry that you support. How do we balance it? What was your advice to some of our professionals who are just trying to figure out that sweet spot?
I love this question, and I'm going to put my so. A lot of people they call me a risk rebel. It's the name
Oh,
that I was given
risk
because
rebel. What?
yes, risk rebel because I challenge the norm in a compliant way,
Mm,
where just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean we still have to do it this way if we can still execute it
yeah.
effectively, right? So to answer your question, I would say, by treating regulation as an architectural constraint, not a blocker, right? Most teams ask, well, how do we pass this audit? Strong leaders ask, how do we design decisions that hold up under scrutiny, right? Because scrutiny will happen, and you want to make sure that whatever decision that you design can withstand the test of time, essentially, right? So I've seen businesses move faster, not slower, by integrating risk early
Yeah.
and avoiding rework, reputational damage, as well as leadership whiplash later. Because compliance should be a byproduct of a good decision, not a quarterly scramble, right? Every time the quarter comes around, we got to produce these metrics, but if you're integrating these risks early on in your work and the way you mitigate things and just your risk posture, where it's adapted, within the culture of the company,
Yeah.
a lot of these things can avoid it where leadership is not having a whiplash later, like, whoa, I didn't see that coming.
Right.
Well, now we're being proactive versus reactive, and that's
Right.
key, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I actually love the fact that you said you're a risk rebel because that's where a lot of very seasoned organizations have been around. Oftentimes, they have a very established culture, and that culture is we didn't have to do this before. And then
Yep.
you have people like you and I are coming in and says, "Great, we know that. However,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right. However, we have to do it now." And oftentimes, there's more of a challenge around what is it that I can cut than actually integrating from the start, adding security as part of the design process. So when we have privacy by design or we have security by design, these are not what is it called, buzzwords. These are actual concepts that will help the organization be healthy and prevent the risk, to your point, your drift in your program, the failures that happen in drift if we do it up front, part of the design process. And so, compliance isn't put constraints on you. It's compliance is to say, here's the buffer, here's the bumper, designed in this framework. If you want to go outside of that framework, we need to talk about it because we
Yep.
need to ensure that it doesn't impact the organization as a whole. And let's be very real here. At the end of the day, all of us who work for another employer or company or work for ourselves, we do that because we want luxuries in life. We want to take our PTO and our 401k.
Yep.
So if we don't operate with that mindset of how do I design this new innovation, either media, products, services with security in mind up front, then we are already lost the plot, if you will. And then we become more of not necessarily a danger, but we increase our risk exposure, and nobody wants that.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Yes.
Yeah. And so talking about people's idea and intent, right? Talking about regulatory pressures and business objectives. But your focus with serving as an advisor on several boards is really around behavioral risk intelligence. So Give me some more details, and hopefully this is helpful to our listeners who are trying to figure out, how do I shift culture? So where do human decision introduce the most operational risks?
I would say human decision, the most risk is relying on technology. I
Mm,
mean, it's the comfortability of it, right?
right.
And unfortunately, that's why I'm such a huge advocate in just the tech space and AI space, is because just like social media, right?
Yeah.
It's been around for quite some time. Some people can't start their day without it, right? They're very reliant on it to the point where now it takes our human capabilities out of the picture. But not only does it do that, but it keeps us from being sharp, where we've established ourselves, from our experience, that basically is essentially not irrelevant, right? And
Yeah.
that's basically where I came up with, my philosophy around risk rewritten, where basically that's the intentional transformation of risk from reactive compliance functions into a proactive leadership tool. Basically, it's designed to decode behavior, shape
Right.
culture, and drive bold as well as strategic decision making at every level of enterprise. So I think, if we truly continue to rely more on our instinctive abilities,
Yeah.
and really make sure that we understand that that's a tool in itself. Just like AI is a tool,
Yeah.
our instinction is just much a tool that's necessary. Because at the end of the day, you can use all these AI LLMs as you want, right?
Fair.
That's where I think the difference really lies, where we need to really ensure that we are utilizing our instinctive abilities from a human behavior component, because although AI is here to stay,
Yeah.
at one point it's going to give you incorrect data where it's going to start hallucinating, right? The data won't be 100% from a integrity side. Let's say like when you first were analyzing a risk, and that's where you have to have that trained eye to understand that, hey, this is not producing what I need to produce from a metric perspective, from
Mhm.
assessment of a risk. So that's where I would say always rely on your instinction
Mhm.
versus tech.
Yeah.
And that is going to continue to allow you to not only remain stable in the evolving economy as it heads into a full-blown tech ecosystem, that's
Yeah.
going to allow you to still remain relevant.
Yeah, I agree. And then just a follow up question to that, because you brought up something about our instinct. Like, what are some of the cultural signals that you think predict incidents? Like human behavior decisions, AI. So let's just use AI as an example.
Hmm.
So AI tells us, predictive based on a large amount of data, but it could make mistakes because, as we know, bad data in, most likely bad data out. What you are able to identify by doing some type of, assessment, review, governance over AI, like what are some of those cultural signals that really kind of, you are like, wait, this is going to cause an incident? What are those things that you've experienced, or even, part of what you think in the real world?
Trust and verify is very key.
Mm,
Don't just take whatever it's producing at face value.
yeah.
And I think that's just a standardized fundamental in the GRC space in general, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be a good leader in the space, you have to lean upon that, because I mean, even let's say we all have a million vendors that we use in the GRC space. Do we always have 100% confidence in them? No, we do
No,
not,
we shouldn't
right?
anyway. It should
Yeah,
be
yeah,
zero
yeah,
trust.
yeah,
Zero
yeah, we shouldn't.
trust.
Yeah, zero trust. We shouldn't. And I think from a cultural perspective, just trust yourself. Sometimes we doubt ourselves. Sometimes we are actually, what I find this too, especially new professionals that are getting into this area, they're scared to use their voice, and sometimes that can be a very much detriment to them as far as the progression, because don't be scared of leadership. Risk management 101, see something, say something, because at the end of the day, you might be wrong, but you might be very much right too. And you could be very much saving the company a lot of money. And it's about really trusting, again, your instincts and understanding that your voice matters, especially in the space of GRC, because that's going to continue to, one, help promote that risk culture where people now see, hey, he said something or she said something because they felt this was not right. So that gives me the confidence to say, hey, if I'm doing some research or if I'm assessing this risk and hey, that doesn't look right, I got the confidence to bring this to leadership and say, hey, we might want to look into that because this is just what I feel. And then do your due diligence. Make sure you have that data to support it. Make sure you do your research because that's what's going to also make you credible. So I would say just make sure that's a takeaway for all the new up and coming professionals trying to get into the space. Use your voice because it's more powerful than you realize, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be a little bit of a rebel here. You said that using your voice is absolutely critical to risk management 101, and I totally agree. I mean, that's what compliance is raising your voice to say there is something either off or this is something that we need to shift to, right? We are essentially like kind of the watchman on the tower kind of thing. But I one of the things I found even in my earlier years, and I think this is a common theme across our new up and coming GRC experts and practitioners, is that sometimes leadership behavior weakens the
Mm.
controls, right? So, what are your thoughts on that? How can we either give idea or suggestions to our community and to our young professionals of how, if you noticing that my leader might be a risk, how do we navigate through that? Or how do I articulate a risk in such a way that it captures the leader's
I like
attention?
where you're going here
Yeah.
because this is, I mean, if you work in GRC, especially I would say particularly in risk management,
Yeah.
the business does not like us, right?
No,
They
not
they do not like us, right? And anytime they see us coming, they run for the hills.
yeah.
Well, I would say so. Take that mentality, but you can also apply that with your fellow colleagues, especially your leaders. Because here's the thing, right? At the end of the day, my best practice that I utilize, you know, especially when I'm speaking to the business, whatever, I take myself out of the equation. I take them out of the equation. And what I let the foundation be where we can
Mm,
come to a central spot is either it's going to be the policy, it's going to be the regulation,
yeah.
it's going to be some type of documentation, or as they say, data is the new oil right now.
Yeah.
Because what this does is that it takes us out of the equation where there's no bias,
Yeah. It's not
there's no
personal.
there's no feelings. Yeah, it's not personal. You
Yeah.
know, it's strictly professional. But not only that, they now have understanding that hey, you're just trying to do your job the best to your ability,
Yeah.
and respect goes a long way in this industry,
Yes.
especially when you're working in our space. And I say, apply that mentality exactly in the same way that you would be engaging to the business, to your leadership or to your colleagues, because what they see is that, hey, you take your job seriously.
Yeah.
One, that you're trying to reach out to continue your path or your journey, whatever that may be,
Hmm.
and you're showing them that you can do it.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, again, going back to, I think we were talking about intent versus initiative or
Or execution.
execution.
Yeah.
Yeah, execution. That's what they want to see, right? So take all the feelings out of it. Let your work speak for itself, because I'm a huge advocate on your work ethic speaking for itself. And I promise you that will continue to allow you to progress, not only amongst your team, but in your organization as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the things that I use myself as an example. So I always say I'm homegrown. I'm a little scrappy. Everything I know in compliance. So I started in 2014, right? And so, but it was Title VII. It was another side of compliance. It was more in the community base, making sure everyone's voice is heard. There's resources available to various communities and cultures. But my working background has always been technology and program
Hmm.
and network administrator. So now I'm able to do both. And I share that because one of the things I learned in this space is that it's not personal. Even though I'm passionate about it, I'm like,
Yeah.
we must do it the right way
Yeah.
because I've seen such and such go down, and I've seen such and such and go down, and I've seen it personally, or I've heard the horror stories.
Hmm.
No one responds to that. and that
Absolutely.
I
That is a
remember
fact.
yeah, I remember going to a conference and a very astute expert in compliance. I want to say they were a head director or senior director of their department, and it was just like, how do I get people to listen to there is a red flag and we need to turn left and not keep straight kind of thing. And I can hear his passion, like he's so frustrated at this point. And I said, at some point, the only thing you can do is raise it up as high as you can, document that you raised it up as high as you can, and then you have to let it go. Right.
Yep.
Because if not, you're going to drive yourself crazy. And then you become labeled as the squeaky wheel that never stops squeaking. Right. And that's not what you want. You want to be labeled as the person that's going to do the right thing for the business, and that we are not just compliance, but we are GRC strategists. We
Yep.
understand the business objective. We understand the regulatory pressures. We know how to kind of meet in the middle, because there's times where we have to negotiate. We may not be able to get every single resource to meet every regulatory compliance. So you have to come up with a map or a plan of action. But that doesn't mean that you're not successful. It's when you make it personal and it
100%.
drives you, you become that squeaky wheel that everybody's trying to find a WD-40 for.
Yeah, and and I love that because the best way I can describe it too is like you don't want to be cast type in this space,
Yes.
where people already know what to expect, they know what they're gonna get.
Yep.
That does not equate to evolution. That does not equate to your journey,
Yeah.
where you want to take it, right? You don't want to be put in a box, as you say.
Yeah.
And, that's where that strategist mentality comes into play, where that's going to keep you, you know, basically evolving where you're trying to go.
Yeah. And I agree. And one of the things, I have a really great mentor um, in my organization. He said something really prevalent. He said, you have to be creative. Right. One of the things I was like, I don't have enough resources. He says, okay, but you have the whole organization. Even though they don't report to you directly, make them
Yep.
your employee. I said, now, wait a minute.
I love that.
Right. So be creative in this space. And so
Yes.
part of that is building relationships, right? And saying, I'm not here to give you a hard time, but I am here to show you that this is a regulation. What do you need for us to meet this together? Right. And so
Hmm.
I agree with you on that, is that it's an interesting, it's like walking the plank and praying that you don't get tossed over when you're walking with compliance and that business strategy. That is so difficult. And every single expert in the field, seasoned, brand new, that is something that we always have to contend with. And so I think, I love when you said you have to be the risk rebel. It's because you do. Like you have to figure out, get past your own emotions from that,
Yep.
give yourself a minute. I always tell my team, give yourself 10 seconds to be mad about it. And then let's go handle business. Because at the end of the day, what speaks to your senior levels, your senior executives and managers is the bottom line, is dollars
Yep.
and cents for them. And then if you have
Yep.
developers, program managers, program owners, project owners, whatever, then it's just, how much time do you need from me? Because I have a
Yes.
million other things to do, which is also currency, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
to your point, I really think it is critical that we continue to uplift each other in this space, that you're not by yourself, and no, it's not going to get any easier. I don't think it's going to ever get any easier in this space.
It won't. And one thing too, I'll just add, it won't get easier, but one thing that's beautiful about GRC is that we are a very close proximity community
Yes, we are.
where if you continue to thrive in your journey, you'll have colleagues and mentors for life,
Yeah.
so I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and so, which is a great segue to my last question to you, as we get close to wrapping up. What advice would you give leaders building or trying to mature their own GRC program today in their environment, or if they're starting out and they're trying to create some type of evidence or repository that they actually are able to execute a theory?
So again, this is a risk rebel answering this, and just got to follow along with
Or,
me
yep,
because it might, scare some people and be like, what the heck is he talking about? But
got
just
it.
listen for a second, right?
Yep,
So I would say this: stop trying to look mature, start trying to make better decisions.
that sounds good.
Build your program around moments of pressure, not moments of reporting. Embed risk where work actually happens, not where slides get written. I
Yeah.
mean, we all get inundated with slides in
Yeah.
this space. And here's the question that every leader should honestly sit with. If this decision fails publicly, will we still stand behind how we made it? That's what real GRC maturity looks like at the end of the day. How confident can you stand behind your GRC program when something fails or when something goes right? Are you going to run for the hills, or are you going to feel confident that, hey, we made the best decision because we did this effectively based upon not what the metrics said, but what the story told us?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the things that is important, that at the end of the day, can you support your decision? Sometimes I find, even though we live on matrices, sometimes it just comes down to, is it the right thing to do?
Yes.
Right? Because
Yes.
the matrix says, I need to make the bottom line of, an extra $100 million for the quarter to break even. But the right thing to do is we need to go back to the drawing board to redesign this product. So it may cost us.
Yes, and that's why human component is always necessary, because
Yeah.
that's something that AI cannot do.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it should be a tool to assist us to be more effective, to produce as quickly as possible without losing the integrity of what we produce.
Yeah,
Um,
because I mean, honestly, risk isn't the enemy of progress. It's the unexamined decisions are,
yeah,
and that's what it comes down to.
absolutely. I agree. So listen, you guys, if you thought that this conversation was totally dope, let me tell you, he has a book coming out. So Devin, tell us about your book.
Absolutely. It's called Risk Rewritten. And again, it's my philosophy that I shared earlier. And basically, for those who might have missed it earlier, it's honestly, it's me going down my rabbit hole, being the risk rebel, challenging the norm of how we do things, but from my philosophy of, the intentionality of transformation of risk, being just from a reactive compliance function to a proactive leadership tool, designed to decode behavior, how we shape our culture, how we drive bold and strategic change. And what I do within this book is that I touch upon every entity you can think of from the traditional banking side. Then I walk you through what that looks like in the space of blockchain, cryptocurrency, AI. I even talked about NFTs, and I even actually go into detail about quantum computing. What does risk look like in that? So this covers the foundational framework of my philosophy, how you can really integrate that into these environments effectively and be your own risk rebel at the end of the day. So please be on the lookout for that. That should be dropping here in the first quarter. And if you happen to be in Vegas, I'll say this: if you happen to be in Las Vegas in August, I will be speaking at AI for 2026 around this similar topic that we have been talking about today. Should be very exciting, so please feel free to check it out as well. So if you're liking, again, what you're hearing from me and you want to be your own risk rebel, you can follow me on all platforms. LinkedIn, just look at me underneath my name. It's Devon J. Euring. But all under other social media platforms, you can find me at DJE Motivates, because I am all about motivational thought leadership, self-brand development, but making sure that we keep those risk rebels active as well. So thank you for this time. I appreciate it, Monica. This was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for your time, for coming out here and just sharing your experience, giving us a little bit of your framework, and I hope that it resonates with the community. Thank you for just being the risk rebel, right? One of the things I think I appreciate the most about you is going against the grain, and you do it well. You do it in such a way that it's palatable, which is that sweet spot, but it gets things done. And so I am super excited to get a copy of Risk Rewritten.
Absolutely.
Like, I need
For sure.
one. Make sure you follow Devin on LinkedIn. He is quite active on LinkedIn and in all the other social platforms. So listen, if you really enjoyed this episode and you thought this really has gotten me thinking differently a bit, or it's giving you something to work with, either in risk, culture, or decision making, share it with your team, right? This is what my GRC POV is. It's really about talking to real life practitioners to give tips. I'm always looking for new ideas. AI is changing every single day. We went from just, basic AI, your chat GBT, to now we're talking about agentic AI and Gen AI, and I don't know what else we're going to be
Yes,
doing
it's a
later.
lot.
All right. We're going to be doing later. So you don't want to miss out on these conversations. This is not to give you just theory, but this is to give you real life things to practice with. So make sure you subscribe on my GRC POV on your favorite podcast platform. I come out every 2 weeks on Wednesdays at 7:30 a.m. And then you want to tune in weekly because we're dropping something new. It's called MGP News, and it's going to be only on Substack and LinkedIn, where I break down just compliance, cybersecurity, privacy, AI governance, headlines only, and how it's really shaping in our real world decisions. So it drops every Monday at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So with that being said, Devon, give us our closing. One last thing you want the world to know.
I'll say this, and I think I said this towards the end, but I really want to convey this, just from a risk perspective, right? Risk isn't the enemy of progress. It's basically unexamined decisions are, and I'll leave you with that because at the end of the day, people look at risk and they run, but that's not, the essence of what risk is. Risk is so much more than that. Risk is about maturity. Risk is about safety, and risk is about continuing to push the needle forward to better your organization, but to also better the culture for your organization as well. So
I agree. You heard it here, the risk rebel. Risk is not your enemy at all. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being with us this week. Make sure you check us out in 2 more weeks for a new episode. I promise you're going to be blessed. Until next time, own the risk and execute with intent. See you later, guys. Thanks for listening to my GRC POV. Remember, all opinions expressed today are personal views only and don't reflect any organizational positions. Until next time, stay compliant and keep questioning.